many years ago, when I was enrolled at Rheinische Friedrich-Wilhelms-Universität der Stadt Bonn, or commonly called the University of Bonn, one of our lecturers once quoted a passage from a well-known piece of literature known as Faust, written by Wolfgang Amadeus Goethe, one of the greatest scholars of German history, or I should say, scholars of German language and literature in the history of Germany and perhaps the rest of the world. And although I cannot recall the exact wording from that passage, yet it went something like this. It was a dialogue between, it was a dialogue between God and the devil. And the devil says something like this to God the Almighty: Du hast den Menschen geschaffen, tierischer als Tier zu sein. A free translation may be, in the old translation form, Thou hast created man more beastly than any beast. Or in modern English, you have created the humankind more beastly than any beast. I begin to wonder whether this particular dialogue, although written by Wolfgang Amadeus Goethe, and has nothing to do with any theological doctrine, is precisely correct in our world. Being an animal lover, I have a number of loving cats at home. And no doubt, in order to ensure that they are not infected and also die on such infections, I need to vaccinate them, or I need to call the vet in order to vaccinate them properly. But once one of those cats is vaccinated, and this happens also to their predecessors, if I may use the expression in speech marks or in inverted commas, they remember not merely the vet, but any person carrying a similar bag into my modest residence. They immediately do their best to hide themselves, sometimes under the bed, sometimes behind a cupboard, sometimes maybe at a corner, acting ferociously if I try to approach them. In other words, they remember what they experience. But not only they, but even their fellow cats and kittens act in a similar manner, even prior to being vaccinated or injected, simply by seeing the reaction of their, if I may use the expression again in speech marks, their fellow cats. Alas, we human beings don't learn much by seeing what goes on in the world. We have forgotten what took place during the two Gulf Wars, how devastating the situation had been in each and every single case. We have forgotten the war which took place in Afghanistan, initiating in the year 2001, and how devastating the situation was. We have forgotten what took place and is still taking place in the Judean Samaria, also known as Gaza. A vicious regime sent some 300 missiles crossing across the border of Israel, inviting, encouraging, and even entitling befitting Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations Organization, the UN Charter, to retaliate in self-defense. I begin to wonder how blind, how foolish, how unwise can a regime be which invites not merely a war, but destruction of its own people. It is not merely a sad incident. It is tragic. It is unpardonable. It is inhumane. When certain members of a regime, however good or vicious it may be, forget the consequence. They don't suffer themselves in most of the times as much as those, the poorest of the poor, the oldest of the old, the youngest of the young, and the feeblest of the feeble suffer in consequence of their folly. This very day happens to be the Bengali New Year's Day, exceptionally on the 14th of April, as generally this day happens on the 15th of April in most of the remaining years, unless it happens to be a leap year. It should have been a day of joy for me, since I speak Bengali as my first native tongue. Yet my joy has been marred not merely by the alarming news of a certain vicious regime attacking Israel, sending some 300 missiles into the territory of Israel, even though most of them were intercepted. Yet I fear the consequence which is likely to befall. For the very people now trodden under feet by that vicious regime, which does not regard the dignity of women, nor of young children, nor of babies, but are extremely selfish, self-centered, and foolish, in my view, to invite such a dreadful escalation which is likely to follow. This is my most tragic message on this Bengali New Year's Day to my fellow Bengali communities, but also to my fellow global citizens residing anywhere and everywhere in the world on this earth. I bid you a solemn day, even a solemn Sunday of this 14th April 2024.